In the name of Yahushua HaMashiach, may this word bless the hearers and give glory to the Most High. Amen. Who are the Moors? The story of the Moors is a story of stolen and hidden identities. In this video, I hope to address that, but one of the primary things is that the Kabbalah says in order to enslave a people, you must make them black. Black actually means blanco, white. So let's look into the history of the Moors and who the Moors actually are. So in this part of the series, I am just going to track the transition of the Moors from negro to blanco. From negro to blanco. And this is not necessarily perfectly accurate because this is a lot of information to digest. It's taken me a while to put it together, and it's still not going to be perfectly accurate. So I again call on you to do the research yourself, but I really am trying to look into the faces of the aristocracy to actually see who's who. So this part of the series is called From Renaissance to Reformation and Royals Rebrand. From negro to blanco and back to negro. So let's get started. I'm going to start with reviewing some of the history of the timeline of the Moors. Hopefully I can do that quickly. And then we are going to move into covering the royal lines of Europe from just about the time of the popes, then on to the Medicis, the Italian, the Hohenzollerns, the Habsburgs, the Spaniards, the people of Portugal, the French, and the British, and how they all tied together. I'm going to be jumping around a lot, so please be patient with me because this is really a lot of information. But I will try and stay as on track as possible. And I think the most interesting thing for everybody is going to be to see the faces of these people. And, you know, of course, we have to address how everyone is misrepresented and whitewashed and assigned. There's a lot of error in the genealogies I'm finding. So it's very difficult to do, but let's get into it. So we're going to be looking at these families in terms of the time frame from maybe around the 1300s to the 1800s. And this is probably one of the most prosperous time, and this is around the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade as well. So this is the most prosperous time of Europe. So we're going to be looking at all of these families in terms of them being contemporaries at this pinnacle of European history, and then this transition from negro to blanco. So that's sort of the context that I'm going with here. So just for a quick review, we already established that the Mauritanians appeared about 1100 BC at the time of the height of the Solomon Empire in North Africa. And that was basically in the form of the Ephraimites of the Northern Kingdom trading with the ships of Tarshish out of the area of Gibraltar, what was later called Gibraltar, and trading all the way to North America and up into Europe. These shipping communities or people from these various nations worked together to sell goods between these various kingdoms. After the fall of the Northern Kingdom, it seems that many of the Mauritanians went out again to those areas or remained there. And we established that the Carthaginians were also descended from these Moorish people. They were called Barbars, they were called Moors, they were called Carthaginians. They resided in Egypt. And in 70 AD, at the fall of the temple in Jerusalem, there was another swell in the Moorish community in North and West Africa. But already many of them were already in Europe, in places like Britain and Spain. And a lot of them moved into Europe and began to take it over. And we've also established that it wasn't until 700 CE and perhaps 800, that's, I would say, about 17 to 1800 years after Mauritania was established, that the Arabs began to call themselves Moors. And the Arabs actually were mixed with the Ottomans, who were actually white people. They were not black Moors. And a lot of these Moorish people were force converted into Muslims. And so sometimes when we're talking about Moors who were Muslims, they're not necessarily genetically Muslims or genetically Ishmaelites. They are still the same people. However, once the Ottoman Empire took over the identity of the Muslims and the Arabs, they pushed into Mauritania and also pushed into Europe with the Moors. And of course, in 1492, we're going to see that the Jews were driven from Spain and flee back to Morocco. And of course, this is when all the Moors are fleeing back under threat of slavery and also having their children stolen. And today we know, present day Morocco is also called Essaouira. Essaouira. So that's my review. Once again, this period in which these black Moors are in Europe is called the Dark Ages, from about 476 AD to 1492. However, this was a time of the conquest of Europe by the Moors and the Negroes. And the Dark Ages are defined by the Europeans as a period of declining morals, public corruption, urban decay, increase in military spending. However, the Moors provided the vital link between ancient and modern civilization, light of knowledge, which illuminated the Moorish lands of Spain and Sicily, and they were instrumental in dispelling the gloom and ignorance that enveloped medieval Europe. Okay, so Europe came under the Moorish revival of culture, writes Robert Bifault in The Making of Humanity. And it was not in the 15th century that the real Renaissance took place, but rather at this time. And Spain, not Italy, was the cradle of the rebirth of Europe. And after sinking lower and lower into feudalism and ignorance, because of the shift in power, it was the Moors who came into Europe and began to transform everything. So let's learn a little bit more about these European Moors. So according to Nature Knows No Color Line, the Moors were crossing into Spain after they captured Gibraltar, and they defeated the Goths, white Germanic invaders of 3 centuries earlier. And their commander, Tariq a Negro, gave his name to Gibraltar, formerly called Calpe. And these Africans were Moors, sometimes called Arabs because of their language. To the Greeks, the Moors were a dark or black people. Moros to the Romans, Moors, a woolly-haired people, synonymous with Ethiopians, but or the river Niger. As late as 5th century AD, Roman historians called the people of Morocco black. It's presumed that the Romans mixed with Moorish women. Now, Julius Caesar was supposed to have had a Moorish queen. And then it says later came the Vandals, a white people who were allies with the Moors against Rome. And then obviously there was a mixing with the Romans, but the Vandals are very often misnamed as being Caucasian. They're actually white. And we'll learn in a minute that Queen Charlotte of England considered herself a Vandal, and she considered, or a Wendell, and she considered those people to be Nigers, to be people of the Niger River. And once again, the Ottoman Turks were white Gentiles, saying that they were Arabs, but they often used, like I said before, the Negro Moors converted them to being Arabs and then used them in North Africa. So, as I was mentioning a moment ago, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Queen Charlotte, because I'm here in Vancouver by the Queen Charlotte Islands, and as many people know, Meghan Markle is living out here with Prince Harry now. And of course, they shot their PR movies when Harry met Meghan out here. And so, I did a video on this a while ago. What I'm calling it is a rebrand for the royals. But I talked about the fact that basically the royals know what time it is, and it's time to switch back to black. And so, with the movie and settling on the Queen Charlotte Islands and this uncanny resemblance between Meghan Markle and Queen Charlotte, and then all that's been happening in Europe with her being ostracized with the royals out there wearing, and the aristocracy wearing these Moorish brooches and so on, the subject's on everybody's minds. Now, to be clear, everybody among those royals knows that the true aristocracy are the original Black Moors of Europe. That's who made these very expensive brooches. And so it's actually fear of discovery or acknowledgement of the truth that this particular woman is wearing. I can't remember her name right now, but you can look it up, is wearing on her chest. And to me, it looks a little bit like a marketing campaign. Of course, nobody makes jewels out of slaves. Only wealthy emperors and conquerors make jewels out of the image of themselves. And so it just shows how much more relevant this time of awakening is. So let's talk a little bit about Queen Charlotte. She was considered a Moor. And she was the wife of King George III and mother to Queen Victoria. Now, I'm not so sure how true that is about Queen Victoria, because Queen Victoria has a very aquiline nose. And both King George and Queen Charlotte had very sort of rounded features. But we were able to confirm, and I actually found this on Frontline, that Queen Charlotte actually penned on the occasion of her wedding to the mad King George III and her coronation celebration, a call back to her Black roots. And this is what she says: descended from the warlike Vandal race, she still preserves that title in her face. Though shone their trumpets o'er Numidia's plain, so Numidia, okay, that's Africa, that's East Africa, and Alusian fields their name retain, but they subdued the southern world with arms. She conquers still with her triumphant charms, O born for rule, to whose victorious brow the greatest monarch of the North must bow. So she affirms in this poem at this time that was found at the time of her marriage and coronation, that she is a Vandal, a Wendell, and that she is of East African and Moorish origin. Okay, of Niger. She is one of the people of the Niger River. And of course, we have this wonderful picture of Queen Elizabeth bowing before Haile Selassie, which I thought I'd show you. I don't actually know that Haile Selassie is a true Ethiopian. I actually believe there's another man who is the last true Ethiopian king, but that's another story. But I just thought I'd put that in there. And what is very interesting about King George III, who was called the man King George, is his grandfather, King George I, talked about a great number of his subjects being delivered into slavery in the 1700s. Now, this is well after the Black Arabs of northeastern Europe were conquering Eastern Europe and taking slaves. So I think very much that this is more so talking about the Moors being taken into slavery, and this is what Queen Charlotte and King George shared. And so this may be perhaps the reason why he was called the Mad King George. He had a very large family, and they seemed to have a very strong relationship. So I'm not quite sure that history is, as per usual, portraying him correctly. Now, there were definitely Negroes in Britain before Julius Caesar, and Irish folklore mentions this, mentions Black people. And so here are the British family's heraldry, images of heraldry. And what heraldry actually is it's defined as the system by which a coat of arms and other armorial bearings are devised, described, and regulated. Armorial bearings or other heraldic symbols, colorful ceremony. So all the pomp and heraldry, the art and science of devising, displaying, and granting armorial insignia and tracing and recording genealogies is called heraldry. The use of heraldic symbols or coats of arms as a means of identification spread through European nobility in the 13th century. So what happens is that we can look throughout Europe at all of this multitude of coats of arms. And we see up until like the 1400s, just hundreds and hundreds of these coats of arms with the black Moors depicted on them. And so whether it's in Holland, Greece, Switzerland, Portugal, Germany, you have these Negroes in these coats of arms, okay? And so here are some of the family names. I can barely pronounce them, but Bobas Havia, Grismala, Gerberweiler, Korkaskowski, so we're even in Eastern Europe, right? And you see these ones on the right, it says Mohr, M-O-H-R, okay? And some of these are Portuguese in the middle, and then the other is German here, Mohren, Mohren. And we look at all these French and Belgian coats of arms, French, Dutch, Belgian families with names of Negro. You see it's Mohr, Morel, 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 Morelli, More with an E, Moreau, Mordson, Morand, Moride, Mormon, Moraes, Morel, all of these various iterations, variations of the name Mohr. And so we look here at this particular set of coats of arms, this last one here, and it says, as shown in Holland and Germany, where Swart, and Schwartzman, that is black, there are families with such names with Negroes in their coats of arms. Belgium has several Moors, Moor van Immersel, Moors with Negroes. Some could have been Negroes in the army of Spain when the latter ruled the Netherlands. So Poland has Mora with Negro. France has many families with Moret, Morel, Morecad, Morot, Moreau, and many other derivatives of Moor are represented by the Negroes. Le Noir, which is still used in France, means black man, and French families with branches in Anjou, Normandy, Brittany, Bon has Negro, family Nigre is still used by the French for Negro. Okay, so the evidence is overwhelming. There's over 490 German crests with black Moors on them from this time period. Originally, the black Moors, during their reign in Germany, had their heraldic traditions for war and ceremony. And later on, as their empire waned, they served in the courts as musicians, servants, confidants, and they even served in the church as priests and nuns. And actually, this was from the beginning. They were serving as priests and nuns to the Gentiles because the Gentiles did not know the Messiah or the true faith. You can see in this image, Germany had a black Queen of Sheba in their Bibles. And also, the Prussian Empire, or the Teutonic Knights, held sway very powerfully in Germany. In July 15th, 1410, there was the Battle of Grunwald, the Crusades against the pagans, and we see this on the right. We see Ulrich von Jungingen, and he's fighting against the pagans. On the left, we see a whitewashed image of him, and he was the 26th Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights, and Teutonic coming from the word like Teutonic, like Deuteronic, like the book of Deuteronomy. White Europeans at this point in time had converted to Christianity, but the Christianity that was going on in Lithuania in 1386 was a different kind of Christianity than what these Moors had taught. And so this king of Lithuania had married the Queen of Poland, and there was this war over what they believed in. And why was that? Because the Moors were Nazarenes. They were Hebrew followers of Yeshua, and they believed in the order of Melchizedek. And they did not accept the conversion of the Lithuanians because it was based on Catholicism, what they believed to be a false religion. So this Battle of Grunwald captures the moment of the defeat of the Moors. And you see this Teutonic Knight king wearing his black cross-like belt as he's being defeated in all his glory here by the army. Later on, we have Albrecht von Hohenzollern, who is the Duke of Prussia from 1490 to 1568. And he is part of the Habsburgs and the Hohenzollern Empire. So these are the Moorish Germans, the black Moorish Germans. And of course, you see them evangelizing throughout. And a little bit more evidence we can find as to the difference in the religion of the dark-skinned Moors versus the Christians and Catholics was that these 40 soldiers in Europe, okay, refuse to reject the Messiah and convert to Constantine Christianity, and they throw themselves in the ocean after almost freezing to death. So again, it's a different faith that the Moors were teaching as compared to the Constantine Christianity or Catholicism or even Protestantism. So just to reiterate, once again, the term Moor appears in European heraldry always meaning Negro. And it's the heraldic term for the head of a black or Negro man, okay? And the Greeks, again, called them Moros, which I told you in my earlier shows, and it means black or dark. And the Moors, Ethiopians, Negritines, Negroes were one in the same. And actually, to Claudian, he spoke of the Moors who dwelt beside the waters of Gur, famous rivers of Ethiopia that overflow its banks. The Niger River. Okay? So now we're absolutely sure of who the Moors are. So Sir William Smith said that the Moors were known in the Alexandrian dialect as the Blacks, and the Moors that were the Numidians, just like Queen Charlotte was talking about. And the word Mauritania meant inhabited by black populations, was later called Negrita or Negro land. So therefore, the Moor therefore is the equivalent of Negro, and it's said to signify a primitive black population, but it's actually quite the opposite, because it was the Moors that civilized Europe. And so, and in some cases, the Moors are actually called white races, but it's actually kind of an error. There were Edomites who were called Moors, but the Edomites were the brothers of the Israelites, and they mixed in very much with the Europeans to become the Romans. And as well, they mixed in very much into Eastern Europe among Ashkenazis. And so they became very fair-skinned, not quite white, but here's where the association comes. And so this reference, again, is from Nature Knows No Color Line. And so clearly, when we look here at this map of Negro land in West Africa, we see very clearly again that this is associated with dark-skinned people, eventually the people to become the people of the transatlantic slave trade. And again, I've said the term is later associated with Muslims, but early on it was not, and it is not associated with the Hamites, the Africans, the sub-Saharan Africans, okay? So according to Zondervan's dictionary, Ham was the youngest son of Noah, and he was one of 8 persons to live through the flood, and he was the progenitor of the dark races, not the Negroes. So the Hamites are different from the Negroes. They are black, but the Hamites were the progenitors of the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Libyans, the Canaanites, okay? But the Negroes are a different people from the Hamites, okay? And here is a definition from, I believe it's from Britannica, and it says, Niger, a surname of Simon, one of the 5 prophets and teachers of the Church of Antioch, who led the Lord to send forth Paul and Barnabas on the first missionary journey, probably a Hebrew Christian from North Africa. So then we see this Northeast Africa representation. And of course, the Christians of the 8th century and much later were Moors that were a jet black people. And so much so that even in Shakespeare's time, Moor was used to signify the unmixed Negro, although eventually they do mix in with the brown Negroes. They start to differentiate the terms. But according to Shakespeare, this was meant to describe the black Moors of Europe, the term Moor. The Moors were dark Negroes that were later, like I said, associated with Muslims and Ethiopians, but really they were more identical to African Americans, says Elliott Smith. Negro admixture is so evident among the Moroccan population that the word Moor is often used to suggest Negro influence, and we see it in Blackamoor. And then the Oxford Dictionary says it is commonly used for the Negro in the Middle Ages, as late as the 17th century. And the physique of a Moor may be a barbar or an Arab, or a mixture of the two with Negro blood. And many Arabs and Berbers are already Negro, okay? So again, there's a repeating of the fact that they were force converted and mixed in with these other people, the Moors were. And it says that we can simply say that the Moors range in color from unmixed to black to fair, and I already spoke about that with respect to the Isaurians. And in fact, many American Negroes were so indistinguishable from the Arabs that in the New York Times, February 2nd, 1045, reports of the meeting between the President Roosevelt and the King Ivan of Saudi Arabia, saying it was a matter of considerable astonishment of the king's servants to discover American Negro cooks and mess boys, and it was more difficult to persuade them that these were not Arabs. The matter was never entirely cleared up. Okay? And then it says here, my impression is the general aspect of the Moroccan people, especially towards the south, is that any of the Negro district in America, with its few whites, Moors are on the whole darker than the average American mulatto. So here they're talking about them being associated with just, again, dark black Moors. Okay, so the Moors conquered Portugal, Spain, France, and Germany in the 700s. And before that, 7 years after the capture of Gibraltar, the Moors invaded France and conquered and overran most of its southern portion. And they went as far east as Switzerland and then part of France. But they were beaten back by Charles Martel. But they remained in southern France, principally on the Western Riviera, which is still known as Little or Le Petit Africa, Little Africa. They took Marseille in 842, aided by what they say here is fellow Muslims, but that's not necessarily true. And then they captured Sicily in 837 and took millions of pieces of gold. Then in 846, they invaded Italy, seized Rome, plundered the Vatican and St. Peter's Cathedral, and carried off immense wealth, gold, jewelry, tapestries, and paintings. And then later on, they sold back much of this loot to the Pope, and it says with Jews as an intermediary. But what you've got to understand is that the Moors were Jews, Arabs, and people of Niger. They were all kind of one people they're talking about here. In 982, they defeated Christendom under Otto II of Germany, and a bunch of unmixed Negro troops, most of them from Ethiopia and Sudan, furnished a large portion of the Moorish or Saracen troops, and then dominated most of Italy for years, parts of it until the 13th century, where they were swamped by invasions from the north and then absorbed into the Italian population. In Africa, they continued to be the leading power to no little extent in India. They dominated the Mediterranean and the North Atlantic and plundered the coast of Western Europe and the British Isles. They actually even conquered and ruled Scotland, and all the way up late until the 10th century, these provinces were wholly black, and the supreme ruler of them became, for a time, the paramount king of transmarine Scotland. So you can see by these photos how when you are mixing the black Moors with the Europeans, you're getting this admixture that creates this red hair, what they call in the States a red bone. Malcolm X called himself red. People called him red or the red bone. And this is various aristocracy in Italy who are painting this racial admixture of Moor and Gentile. This is Sofonista, who is one of the female painters of the time in Spain and Italy, who painted many royals and even her own family. Sofonisba Anguiasola, and she was Italian. So you see how this transition is taking place. Now, I want to be very clear with you that the original people of the North African and Niger regions, as I said before, they were not Hamites. So they were not midnight black people. The true color they were known as before they started mixing in with the Gentiles and before they started mixing into sub-Saharan Africa was as maroons, this Moorish red-brown color. And it's actually the same color as burnished brass. So you can see from these sculptures from the 1800s and earlier, these are all images of Moors, okay? And they have this maroon, red, brown, burnished brass skin color. This is a life-size young Moor. Notably, he's holding a candle, standing before a Moroccan footstool, and this still makes a significant reference to bringing light to the world, to their spiritual practices. And then these statues are by a Charles-Henri Joseph Cordier, and they feature the African Venus and the Yahudian, this man from the Sudan. Now, I am not quite sure that these sculptors are named properly or the titles are. But once again, just keep in mind that the Moors' true color was a burnished brass skin color. And they were most frequently, again, referred to as black and then brown. Now, the Moors did not consider themselves, as I've said before, to be Christians. They called themselves Natsar, Nazarenes, and their hair would be referred to at times as Nati. So like the Nati dread in Jamaica. And so here's a description of them, again from Nature Knows No Color line. And chaussure, describing a yeoman. So this is the very famous chaussure, and this is centuries before Shakespeare used it in connection with color, the term Moor. Describing a yeoman, he says, a knotty head had he with a brown visage. So again, this is this brown maroon color. And then Andrew Brodie, a century or so after chaussure, uses it in connection with Negroes, and he says there will be many Moors brought into Christendom in great cities and towns to be sold. They have great lips and knotty hair, black and curled, and their skin is soft, and there is nothing white but their teeth and the white of the eye. And it says that is knotty, for Negro hair preceded the use of the Danish kink or kinky. The term now is used in the United States. However, knotty still survives in the West Indies for the hair of the Negroes. Okay, so this is telling you these are people whose hair naturally dreads, and you can see by this noble woman in this sculpture that it was quite a characteristic of beauty, and it was associated with the Natsars, the Nazarenes. They did not call themselves Christians, they called themselves Nazarenes, because Christ was a Nazarene. So their faith was very different from the European Christian faith. And when we look at Jane Austen and we listen to some of her writing, this is also clarified in many of her stories as a Moorish aristocrat. So according to, I guess if you just Google it, 10 or so descriptions of Jane Austen, who lived in England from the 17 to the 1800s. She was of a brunette complexion and had classical African facial traits, and she was an activist of Moorish ancestry. And of course, in her books, you find that she's very insistent about the brown and very brown complexion and special beauty of her heroines. And there can be no doubt that she's writing about brown and very brown and black-skinned persons belonging to the gentry and aristocracy. Henry Crawford in Mansfield Park is absolutely plain black and plain. In Northanger Abbey, two women talk about their favorite complexion in a man. They ask dark or fair, and this is answered as, I hardly know. I never much thought about it. Something between both, I think. Brown, not fair and not very dark. And brown isn't meant by light-skinned brown like Jane Austen is shown here, but as the burnished brass color that I showed you before. And in Sense and Sensibility, Mariana, notice her name, Mariana Dashwood, is Austen so lovely, uncommonly brilliant, and delightful beauty, her skin was very brown. Pride and Prejudice, the most famous of Austen's heroines, Eliza Bennet, is described deprecatingly by her rival in love, Miss Caroline Bingley, as she has grown brown and coarse. So you see there's a racial rivalry going on even in this times, and why else would you have the title Pride and Prejudice? This is the time of the waning of the Moors' influence in Europe. Now, as I said, there are so many of these sculptures and images and like paintings that are undocumented or whitewashed. And so sometimes it's difficult to figure out who's who. And at first I thought this was Septimus Servus, one of the leading conquerors of Britain, who was an African. And he was said to have a lot of Negro strain in him. But he did not go and rule in England. Somebody named Theodore, an Oriental, was named in his place and went, and Hadrian went as his mentor. So Ireland also had a Negro bishop, Saint Dimian or Dimam, sorry guys, the Black, who died in Ulster in 658. As I said, I'm still figuring this out and figuring out a lot of these paintings. So this was another version of what I found on this huge sculpture of this Black man. And he was also named as Pope Gregory I, or Germany's Gregor the Moor. Okay? So again, we have a Black Moor in Germany. Gregor the Moor, 1350 to 1683, so the bracket is pretty wide in time. They talk about the Theban Legion that was led by Saint Gerion, so Gregory, the patron saint of soldiers whose bones were discovered in the church that bore his name and whose cult supported a dramatic expansion of the church between the 11th and 14th centuries. And then, so that is Gregory the Moor. So again, he's not wearing a pope-like hat. He's wearing a different kind of an open sort of a hat. And so he may be evangelizing more so the Natsar way than Christian, Catholic, or Protestant. Also, you know, in referring to him as Pope Gregory, he's commonly known as Saint Gregory the Great, a pope from the 3rd of September 590 to the 12th of March 604 AD. So this is far earlier. And he was famous for instigating the first recorded large-scale mission from Rome, the Gregorian mission to convert the then pagan Anglo-Saxons in England to Christianity. So, but this sculpture apparently sits in Germany, is where it is. And it's quite well known that there are many Welsh folk tales that mention black people, unmistakably Negroes, in the story of Peredur the Mabinogion. The blacks mentioned in it might be Silurs, another ancient Welsh poem, Gwaelod Miwar, tells of a robbery between a white and a black. So that just sounds like Jamaican patois right there. So it's pretty indisputable that these people were black, the Welsh. Now, I've mentioned Kenneth Dub, or Dubh, the Black King of Scotland, but I'm just going to mention him again. He was a king from 997 to 1005 AD, and he was the son of King Dubh. And Kenneth was also known as Kenneth the Niger, and Dubh, the surname, means black man, and he was among the dominant Moors in Britain during the 10th century. And the term Niger and Moor were used interchangeably for the, quote, sons of Jacob at that time. And it's a matter of history that there were many seafaring warriors from North Africa who traveled up and down from Iberia. So again, what we said, from Mauritania through the gates of Gibraltar, or up alongside the coasts of Europe, Spain, up into Britain. And of course, again, Kenneth Dubh reigned over black divisions of Scotland and other groups as well, so the white people too. And his surname means black man. Okay. And so these are a couple of images that are also often used to depict him. But I think the second larger one is Robert the Bruce, who is another, I think he's part of, not sure, we'll go into it later, part of either the Tudors or the Schwartzes, the Stuarts. So, but yeah, they were, as I said before, they were a major power in Europe, and the Welsh traditions definitely talk about him. And of course, there was an African king, Gormond, who ruled in Ireland. And so you see again here the shades of dark that I showed earlier, the transition from the black to the white, the racial admixture, the Bianco and Nero. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Morisquerie, the Moorish dance, and its various manifestations. Even royalty took part in these kinds of things, but it's indisputable, according to Sir John Hawkins, an authority on music, that the dance was the invention of the Moor. Tabarot, and another authority, says the same. Dr. Johnson's dictionary says Morris dance, that is the Moorish or Morris dance. Its Negro origin is further seen in that the white dancers blacken their faces to dance it. Okay, but it eventually became a mockery, but it was also an emulation in much the same way you see a lot of white kids dancing to black music, or dressing like black guys with the pants, or singing rock and roll or jazz or blues or hip hop or rap. They take on the pantomime of these black people because the culture is very appealing. And so the Moresque points to the fact that the guise of the black man was the most important and popular, a phenomenon which points on the one hand to the significance of this Moorish race in aesthetic life, in the aesthetic life of the whites, and on the other hand of the habit of all Europeans to paint the face black on certain occasions of cult ritualism. So it eventually, though, evolved into a mockery, I believe. There was a Moorish dance that was in Moresca, and this is in an old town hall in Munich. They also took place in England, and but a lot of times they're represented as white people in black mask, and I think it's because they eventually overcame the Moors, and so it's a mockery. But originally, the Moors were probably doing their own celebratory dances just as they did their heraldry, and then this became a mockery. And so it says the name first recorded of the Moorish dance was in the 15th century. So that's the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade as the Moorish dance. Okay. And it entered English via Flemish Morisque dance. And it was used in Germany as well, and Croatia. And so these are all the places that the Moors first conquered, and then who then turned around and enslaved and conquered the Moors. And so just to affirm the presence of the Moors in Wales and Ireland, I just want to talk about the fact that the Welsh, as I said before, they mentioned black people. But when you look at the bloodlines of white-looking, quote, blackamoors in northern Wales today, we find that they have the same haplogroup, the E1B1A, as the West Africans, like the Igbo, the Ashanti, the Bantu, and African Americans. So you see it's very common, the E1B1A, and this is according to Welsh genetics, abstracts and summaries. So it's very clear that even though they cleared out, the DNA imprint is still there. And I am not a DNA expert, so this could all just be meaningless. But regardless, this is what is currently being said today. Of course, I'll mention again the long march of O'Sullivan Bear, when he was fleeing invading English forces to seek refuge from Irish clans in the north of Ireland. The O'Sullivans had 400 soldiers to protect their 600 women, children, and servants who faced death on such a march. And so you can see this is definitely a Moorish-looking brother. Now, I want to move on to just the difference in class between the Europeans versus the Black Moors. Constantine actually prohibited marriage with the heathen, with the Europeans, okay? Nations of the north and his people. This is according to Nature Knows No Color Line. Mixtures of whites and black in Greece, Turkey, and Central Europe. So the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Empire, like the Western, was a great melting pot. Arabs, Armenians, Jews, Negroes, Nordics met and mingled, disregard of grace. And Byzantine rulers took their title from Basileus from Ethiopia. And such prejudices as existed were tribal, national, and religious. Such prejudice as existed against race in the matter of marriage were directed chiefly against the fair whites to the north because they were considered heathen. Constantine the Great issued strict orders against even marriage with their princes. Marriage of their princes with his people. So basically, it was not popular to be white. It was more popular to marry in amongst the Moors because they had the faith, or the Natsar, and they had the culture, and they had so much to share. And that's why everyone said, and still says today, I want more. Regarding Sicily, in the region of Italy, there was Johannes Morris, who again was a 12th century Black Moorish ruler. King Henry II of Italy, and he was also a Holy Roman Empire, emperor of Italy and Germany, was clearly a black king. And here's even a fresco of King David from the Hall of the Giants in Trinci Palace, Foligno, Italy. So we see King David represented here as being black. And this king, this Roman emperor, Henry II, was the Holy Roman Emperor during the time of the Ottonian dynasty. Okay? And so this, again, it's undeniable, the black presence in Europe. And so now we can see why the following starts to make sense. When we, even among the kings of Spain, obviously, as I've gone on with again and again, there were many Moors and Moorish blood mixed in with the Europeans. And even one of the courtiers of Charles V was a mulatto, and he was a handsome mulatto. And the Italian families, many of them had variations on the name Moor, as Moretti, Morini, Morelli, and so many of them were Negro, and they also had Negro in the name. Negro, Negrina, Negrona, Negra, Saracen as well. And so when we look at Holy Roman Emperor Charles V of Spain, it's very clear that we can see that he was a mulatto. He was mixed with Black Moor and European, and he actually sacked Rome in 1527. And in 1527, what he did was he supported Alessandro Medici. So Alessandro Medici was the son of Pope Clement VII. So he was the son of one of the popes of the Italian line, and a Moorish woman. His nickname was Il Moro, and he was over the Florentine Republic after Charles V sacked Rome. Alessandro fled, and then Charles supported Alessandro against the Florentine exiles. And so Alessandro Medici lived 1510 to 1537, Duke of Penne and Duke of Florence, 1530 to 1537, and he was actually married to the daughter of Charles V, and she was Margaret of Pharmacia, and she was the regent of the Netherlands and daughter of Charles V, as I already said, and sister of Philip of Spain, but she was an illegitimate child. She was the child of a concubine. But we'll go on to trace this lineage. Now, keep in mind the numerous times that Rome was sacked, and with the various popes, what happened was that there wasn't a wholesale military control of the earth in terms of empires for Rome. Instead, there were feudal systems where there were scrimmages. So what they did was they used religion to manipulate and unify people. And so sacking Rome was almost like a publicity stunt for the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, because it was after his rule that the papal bulls and everything were issued to send the Black Moors into captivity and to go over to North America and South and Central America and Africa and put everyone into captivity. So I think very much that Charles sacking Rome was a publicity stunt and the beginning of a new way of ruling. What's interesting is that the Medici symbol is the exalted horn and the rhinoceros, and this was the emblem of Alessandro de' Medici. And of course, in biblical prophecy, it talks about this single-horned animal, the rhinoceros, it refers to in scripture, exalting its horn and ruling and trampling upon the children of God, running over them. And so it's very significant that this was his emblem. And it's believed that his background, because the Isaurians mixed in with the Romans, the Isaurians were dark-skinned East Africans, descendants of Isaac, and they mixed in with the Romans. Actually, Rumi was one of the sons of Esau. And so you can see where this genetic line is coming from, and the exalted horn of the rhinoceros. And Alessandro Medici himself had a mistress. Just, I guess the chain didn't stop, wasn't broken by him. And he had two children, one of whom was Giulia de' Medici, his male offspring, and then Silvia de' Medici. And she was the daughter of Taddea Malaspina, who we see her on the left. And she was, Taddea was his mistress. And then this is his son and daughter. And you see this is a very whitewashed picture. You see they've actually, it looks like they've changed the hair texture and the color of the skin. People are looking pasty. And then again, this is the whitewashing that went on with the photos to try, the paintings to try to erase the history of the Moors and the blacks in Europe. And when, again, I'm going to go back to Spain and Portugal to say that the offspring of the Moors and the West Africans were among the discoverers of the New World and the first builders of Latin America. Okay, in that century when the Portuguese acquired African possessions, they already had much colored blood in their veins. At first, the colored blood had come to Portugal in dribbles, and later it became a flood. Some of the whites and many of the Iberian Gothic Arabian Negro offspring were the dark-eyed girls of Cadiz. Okay, and it says, and then there were many importations of Negroes into Spain for the army of General Franco. And one of his prize cavalry battalions was made up of coal-black Moors. And they found mates among the Spanish women, excuse me, as did the Moors of Tariq. So again, more evidence as to this racial admixture. And race mixture was so common in Portugal that even the royal family was mulatto. And this is kind of jumping ahead a bit, but John the Fourth shows an evident Negro strain, and John the Sixth was described as a dark mulatto by the French Duchess d'Ambrantes. Of course, they were mulatto. Also, most of these people were, is what you're going to find out. They were all mulattoes. And of course, mulatto is a derogatory term, but that's what the Spanish would call them because the root word is mule. So anyway, they were mixed race, and one of them, the major ones, was Manuel the First, the king who ruled over Portugal from 1495 to 1521. And his reign was also Portugal's golden age when Portuguese explorers sailed to the far reaches of the world, and he sold countless Moorish children into slavery in Guinea and Angola after robbing the Portuguese Jewish Moors of their treasures. So the black Moors were robbed of their treasures and their children, and he authorized it. He was known to be a tender-hearted king, but all kinds of machinations happened around him to change all of that. And so let's get into that. Now, there were kings previous to him, according to the book America by John Ogilvy. King John the First had already sent the black Moors of Spain and Portugal to Saint Thomé and Guinea to be used as slaves. Actually, the offspring and the children, they tended to murder and destroy the men. Hence, there were tons of catacombs and piles of skeletons in Spain. And with the children were sent off to, I think it was 3 to 14 years of age, were put on ships and renamed Christian names and dumped off on islands where there were lots of criminals. So according to John Ogilvy's book, that John III, King of Portugal, sent a colony thither above 200 years before, whom, though the unwholesome air destroyed, yet the place was left not desolate. For he sent a few inhabitants, who first settled in Guinea, next in Angola, and lastly on the island of Saint Thomé, that so they might be better used to the air, that the said king sold all of the Jews, or who are also called Black Moors, for slaves that refused to embrace the Roman religion, and caused their children to be baptized, from whom, coming thither in a great number, most of the present inhabitants were descended. So the children of Angola, the slaves of Angola, St. Thomas, and Guinea, which is where all the major transatlantic slave trade began, were all drawn from the Black Moors of Spain, and King John was the person to initiate it. Now, when King Manuel came along, he tried to give grace to those Moors who fled to Portugal, but he was bought with Maria of Aragon, okay? And he was bought, she was given to him as a wife so that he could rule over Portugal, okay? So Maria of Aragon, June 1482, 7th of March, was a Spanish infanta and the second wife of Portuguese King Manuel, thus Queen Consort of Portugal. She was given in exchange for selling all the Black Moors of Portugal into slavery, and this secured King Manuel's position as king. Her daughter was Isabella of Portugal. When we look at Manuel and Maria of Aragon, we see, especially with the top picture of Manuel, that, and then Maria, again, the shape of the eyes, the top and the bottom of the eyelids, the fold of the eyelids, the thinness of the brow, the broadness of the forehead, those kinds of things are echoed in Isabella of Portugal. And so it's easier to discern that this is a particular family line. There are so many fake and lying images out there of the royals, but when you start to look at them together in these various groupings, which we're going to go into, you can see a stronger and stronger resemblance between them when you're looking at these pictures of these dark-skinned or mixed race people of Europe, the transitional people between blanco and negro. And Isabella then went on to marry King Charles V of Spain. And King Charles V of Spain, you see here on the right, the King Charles I talked about earlier, who I said was a mulatto, whose daughter Sophia was married to Alfonso, the Medici Alfonso. He married Empress Isabel. He was Holy Roman Emperor, and he married Empress Isabel of Portugal, who became mother of Philip of Spain, the King of Spain, Philip II of Spain. And so you can see, if you look very closely at the features, you can see very clearly and very well that when you look at the features of King Charles of Spain, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the features of Empress Isabel, you see around the eyes, the eyelid and the side of the eyelid and the shape of the brows, you can clearly see that this Philip II is the offspring of the two of these people. And there are so many terrible images out there that try to show you who Isabel is, or that represent King Charles V as Caucasian. The younger picture is him on the left. It's an Italian picture, and then on the right is a Spanish painting. But when you look at the features of these two people, you can see the parentage is very clear, that they were the parents of Philip of Spain, who was the next great monarch over Spain. Great in quotes, because again, they sold all the Moors into slavery. And now a lot of times they will show this image on the left of Charles, the Holy Roman Emperor, and say he's some Italian guy, but it's very clear that he is much younger on the left than he is on the right. He's probably in his 40s, early to late 40s on the right, and on the left he's very likely in his 30s. So, and the picture in the middle is actually two different pictures of him from America. There is a painting in a museum in the Americas of him and the Inga tribes, and then all of his offspring. And so let's take a look at that just to validate his identity one more time. So again, this painting at the Larco Museum in Lima, Peru, features and depicts the Inca or Inga emperors, and then subsequent European emperors of the Inca. So these are the Spanish emperors. And what we have here is they date it to about circa 1800, because the first entry is Charles I, seen here on the left, and he's also seen here on the right in another painting. And then the last of them are images of his sons all the way to Ferdinand VII. So it's the Spanish male dynasty is depicted. And so here's a better picture of it. But both of these before I show you that, here's both of these pictures here are of Charles on the left, very young, and a bit older on the right. And so here is the picture, a larger size of the picture of Charles on the top right-hand corner, and the Inga emperors to the left of him. On the bottom are his offspring, his lineage. And I think it starts with Philip III there to the left, but I'll show you another picture where it actually starts with Philip II, and then Philip III, and so on and so on. And then, interestingly enough, they did another reproduction of this painting where they depicted the Inga and the descendants of Charles as being much lighter skinned, much more in detail, but they appear to be much lighter skinned as well, and straighter of hair and so forth. So even then, a whitewashing process was going on in the second version of this painting. But you see very clearly that, Philip the second and Philip III on the far left are very dark-skinned brothers, very dark-skinned men represented in both paintings. They're represented actually darker than this painting or this bust of Philip that we have, because it's actually painted over, and he looks a bit lighter than he actually is. So now, as we move on from Charles V, we're going to move over to his offspring, Philip of Spain, who was one of the major emperors of Spain during the transatlantic slave trade and all of that kind of thing. And here he is depicted with his offspring, Philip III of Spain. And you can see here, as compared to the pictures I just showed you, that Philip III of Spain is looking very fair in this picture. And then beside him is his mother, Anne of Austria, Queen of Spain. Okay? Now, Anne of Austria is also represented as being quite fair, but yet Philip was her cousin. They were kissing cousins. Her father was Pope Manuel, and her mother was Maria of Austria. So she comes from a very heavy lineage. And when we look at this picture of Pope Manuel on the right, Pope Manuel was the younger brother of Charles V. And then next to him is his wife, her mother. And so how it would be that she would turn out to be this blonde-looking woman is quite surprising and questionable. And although this at the same time is a very beautiful, high quality painting, and I do think it's legitimate. I think just she has been whitewashed a bit, and also there are a lot of fair-skinned and sort of blonde-looking mixed race people. So, but it just shows you Philip, and now she's misrepresented as being his niece. She's actually cousins of Philip. And according to biblical law, you can marry your cousin. You can't marry your uncle. So it's just curious that they would mislabel the relationship in that way when we look at the younger brother of Emperor Charles, Maximilian II. He was obviously from the same family. And when we look at his wife, she was about the same shade or color as the mother of Prince Philip or King Philip II. So there's no reason why she would have turned out this light. But regardless, that's the connection between the two, is through that Habsburg and Hohenzollern Empire, as well as the popes. So, so again, you can see this is coming from Austria. This is coming from, again, those Prussian empires, the Slavic Black empires. These are where this is where the line of the Holy Roman Emperors is coming from. And these were the same people who sacked Rome. So, King Philip II had another wife who was of the French and Medici Empire also. And her name she was a French princess, daughter of Catherine Medici, Elizabeth Valois, Queen of Spain. And she was the wife of Philip before he married his cousin. She died quite young. Elizabeth Valois died quite young, and we're going to go into her whole family line in my next video, but they were completely cursed. Catherine Medici was called the Black Queen, and she was cursed, and this young woman died quite young. She was born in 1545 and died in 1648. So she was 23 when she died, but she did give birth to two daughters, Princess Isabella Carla Eugenia and Catalina Michaela Emmanuel, or Catherine Michelle, Duchess of Savoy and of Spain. So both of these young girls went on to become duchesses and princesses. And with Princess Isabella on the left, outliving her sister. So here's a picture of the two sisters. And of course, the female line came through Isabelle de Valois, or Elizabeth de Valois. And so obviously the male line got the kingship, right? But nonetheless, these two young girls did very well, and they are called the Sisters of Spain. And of course, their mother died young, so it made one of them a little bit weaker and one a little bit stronger. I think the eldest sister, Isabella Clara Eugenia, was the stronger one, and she lived into her late 60s. And so here's the two of them holding hands, and you see the intricate detail that these painters, this particular painter, um, Alfonso Sancho's Coelho. You're going to find that when you find more of these true royals, the true Moorish extract, Negro extract, or Isaurian extract Moors, you definitely find that the quality of the paintings are much better. And the lighting is good. They're not as whitewashed. So those are some of his offspring. Some of them died. People had a lot of children back in these times, and they died. So that's as far as I'm going to go right now. We're going to get into the Medici Valois family next. I just want you guys to take a look at this breakdown of some of the women of these families, these royal families that were mixed with the Gentiles, okay? And there's quite a resemblance between all of them, and also the level of the quality of the paintings. And so we're going to go into that in the next session. Of course, when we look at the Tudors, when we look at Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth and everything, a lot of those paintings were destroyed deliberately by Cromwell. He just ripped through and destroyed most of their family paintings. So oftentimes when we're going to be looking at their paintings, they're going to be paintings that were done in France or Spain when they went to visit those countries, those family members, and to become engaged to marriages with one another. There's not much surviving of the Tudor and the Stuart paintings, although some of them are hidden in English dining, of all places. So we're going to be able to see King James the First, hidden in family dinner paintings, like family dining, English dining paintings. That's where they hid some of them. But you can see from these pictures of these women that they all have a very similar look. And this is Medici, this is Spain, Italy, France, and Britain, and a little bit of Denmark and Germany and Austria thrown in there. So you can see that these are all kind of mixed race women. And they all tend to have a smaller jaw, which doesn't always tend to be, which we'll see will be a little bit different with the Schwartzes, with the Tudors. They don't have the smaller jaw, but yeah, it's going to be an interesting journey. And I'm going to take you back here to the first image, which was this image from Renaissance to Reformation and Royals Rebrand, just so that you can get a look at all of these different faces of this particular empire that went from the 1400s to the 1900s. Just so that you can get a picture of where we're going, we're going to look at the Valois of France and the Tudors and the Stuarts, which is King James family. The Tudors are King Henry and Queen Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn, Mary Tudor, and check out some of the relationships with these families as we move forwards. In particular, we'll be looking at what on earth happened to King James' offspring, because that's the point at which they are cut off, and King James wrote his Bible, or commissioned his Bible, saying that his people were going into slavery, and it was for Zion, for his people. So we're going to draw some relationships there. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. Like I said, this is not exhaustive. This has taken me about 1.5 years. Like, honestly, almost 2 years for me to get all figure out these pictures, because there's so much visual confusion out there, so many whitewash paintings. Like, even how they represent this young Isabella Clara Eugenia. They even have these weird looking paintings of her that don't even resemble her, completely whitewashed, with nowhere near the quality or consistency in family relationship pictures, So it's quite interesting what's been done. But you know what? This was all by design. This is the clear sign that these Black Moors would discontinue from their inheritance and their identity. And this is how it was done. And as I've said, a lot of these people could very well be, and especially if you're dealing with, the popes and the Italians, the Medicis, etc., you're dealing very likely with Isaurians. You're dealing with Herodians, descendants of Herod and Esau. So you're not necessarily dealing with the true Black Moors, the Niger Black Moors. These are the brothers of the people of Niger, the Black Moors of Niger. So that's who the Isaurians are, as I mentioned in the beginning. So we'll get into the rest of it. Just give me a thumbs up and like if you like this. Sorry it's taken me a while to get on here, but I'm doing other things, and this is a lot of work, and I've got a lot going on in my life. So it's going to come out when it's going to come out. I hope you guys enjoy this. Please share it, because people knowing their history is the most important step towards finding out who they truly are. Thank you so much for watching. And again, please reach out to me to get my book, Chaya, Eat, Life, and Fast, or the Appointed Times calendar, Moed Appointed Times. You can get them on my website at livelightwell.com for a donation of $7 or more. I appreciate and thank you for watching. May I bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine on you. May he be gracious, lift the light of his countenance, and give you peace. Shalom.